I felt something was off with my wife, and for the past several months, I've felt like something was off in my marriage. It wasn't anything I could immediately put my finger on, but the signs were subtle, like a shift in the air that you can't quite identify, but still feel with every breath. My wife, the woman I've loved since we were teenagers, seemed distant. At first, I chalked it up to the stress of daily life. We've been married for over 2 decades, since we were just 19, and have built a life together, a beautiful, chaotic life with 3 daughters. Our eldest, a 19-year-old college student, is away at school, while our twin 15-year-olds still live at home. Our family life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and it was good, or so I thought. I've always believed that our marriage was solid. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but we were partners. We supported each other's interests, her yoga and pottery classes, my passion for carpentry, and weekend fishing trips. We struck a balance between family commitments, personal pursuits, and quality time together. That's why her recent behavior felt so confusing. In the last 6 months, I noticed she'd been spending more time away from home. She said she needed to decompress or catch up with friends. Initially, I didn't think much of it. Space is healthy, right? We've always been individuals as well as partners. But something about the way she'd light up before leaving the house, a little too excited, felt off. And when she returned, her mood was entirely different. She seemed withdrawn, almost exhausted, like she was carrying a burden she couldn't or wouldn't share. Our intimacy began to dwindle. When we were together, her body was present, but her mind seemed far away. Conversations that once flowed naturally between us now felt stilted. Each time I asked if something was wrong, she brushed me off with a quick smile and reassurances that I was imagining things. It might have ended there if it weren't for our twin daughters. Their behavior changed, too, in ways I couldn't ignore. They started being unusually attentive, offering to help with chores, spending more time in my company, and giving me these looks, like they knew something I didn't. At first, I thought it was just teenage mood swings, but over time, it became clear they were trying to compensate for something, as though they were preparing me for bad news. 2 months ago, I couldn't take the unease anymore. One evening, while my wife was out with friends, I decided to check our phone bill. My intention wasn't to snoop. I just wanted to put my mind at ease. But what I found was anything but reassuring. There, in black and white, was a long string of messages exchanged between her and an unfamiliar number. Hundreds of texts over a short period. My heart sank. When I confronted her later that night, she claimed it was a friend from yoga. She dismissed my concerns with such nonchalance that, for a brief moment, I wanted to believe her. But doubt gnawed at me. Why would she delete the entire thread from her phone? When I asked her about it, she gave me a weak excuse. It was just taking up space. Yet every other conversation was still intact. The lie felt so blatant that it stung more than the suspicion itself. For weeks, I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. But the nagging feeling persisted, like a weight pressing on my chest. Then, 3 weeks ago, everything shifted. My wife suddenly started spending more time at home. At first, I thought it was a good sign, but her behavior was off. She seemed sad, almost haunted. She'd linger around me in silence or sit by my side without saying a word. It wasn't comforting, it was unsettling. Meanwhile, my daughter's behavior grew even stranger. They avoided eye contact and spoke in hushed tones when I was around. I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone in my home knew something I didn't, and that whatever it was, it would break me. Feeling increasingly isolated, I reached out to our eldest daughter, who was away at college. I shared my concerns, hoping she might offer some clarity. She listened intently and promised to talk to her sisters. A few days later, she called back and told me she was coming home for the weekend. "We need to have a serious conversation as a family," she said. Her tone was firm, almost protective, but she refused to tell me more over the phone. The days leading up to her visit were torture. My mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. Was my wife sick? Had something happened to one of the twins? Was there some secret that had been lurking in the shadows of our seemingly happy life all along? When the weekend finally arrived, my eldest wasted no time. She sat me down in the living room, her sisters and mother sitting silently nearby. My wife's face was pale, her hands fidgeting nervously. The twins looked at the floor, their expressions a mix of guilt and sadness. And then, my daughter told me everything. My wife had been having an affair, not with a coworker or someone from her hobbies, but with one of our mutual friends. Worse, it was the husband of a couple we'd been close to for years. The twins had discovered the affair by accident. One afternoon, when my wife was supposedly at yoga, they saw her car parked outside his house. Curious and perhaps a bit suspicious, they decided to check it out. They caught her in the act. My wife broke down when they confronted her. She admitted everything, saying it was a fling and escape from the monotony of married life. She claimed it wasn't about love or even lust, but about chasing the thrill of doing something forbidden. She compared it to the adrenaline rush of being a teenager sneaking out past curfew. Her excuses made me sick. She said she never intended to hurt me or jeopardize our family. But how could she not see the inevitable fallout of her actions? My daughters, especially the twins, were devastated. They'd carried the burden of her secret for weeks, unsure of how to tell me, or if they even should. As I sat there, absorbing the weight of her betrayal, a million emotions crashed over me: anger, sadness, disbelief. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, to ask her why I wasn't enough. But instead, I sat in silence, my heart breaking as I looked at the faces of my daughters. They had been caught in the middle of this mess, forced to grow up too fast because of their mother's selfish choices. My eldest took my hand and said, "Dad, we're here for you. We'll get through this together." Her strength in that moment was humbling. After that conversation, my wife and I talked privately. She begged for forgiveness, promising to end the affair and rebuild our marriage. But trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. I told her I needed time to think. For the sake of my daughters, I'm trying to stay composed. But every day is a struggle. The woman I once trusted with my whole heart shattered it with a single, reckless decision. Whether our marriage can survive this is something I'm still grappling with. What I do know is this: my daughters and I will come out stronger. They've shown a resilience that I admire deeply, and their love reminds me that, even in the darkest times, there's light to be found. As for my wife, only time will tell if I can ever look at her the same way again. To make matters worse, she asked the twins to keep her secret, arguing that telling me would only destroy me and our family. My daughters were devastated, torn between their loyalty to me and their fear of upending our lives. They eventually confided in their older sister, who took it upon herself to bring the truth to light. Hearing all of this felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe the woman I'd spent more than half my life with could betray me like this. I packed a bag and left the house that same day, unable to face her or my daughters. I drove an hour away and rented a small cabin in a state park, needing space to think. The first few days in the cabin were a blur of emotions, anger, sadness, confusion. I felt like my entire world had been turned upside down. My oldest daughter came to visit me, and we had a long, heartfelt conversation. She expressed her anger at her mother and assured me that I didn't deserve any of this. She also pointed out that her mother had a tendency to chase trends and fads, always looking for something to fill a void she couldn't seem to articulate. This affair, she argued, was just another manifestation of that behavior. Meanwhile, my twins were struggling at home. They were furious with their mother and terrified I wouldn't come back. My wife, for her part, was alternating between fits of sobbing and her usual relentless determination to fix things. She bombarded me with messages, apologizing and promising to do whatever it took to save our marriage. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to go home and try to piece things back together for the sake of our family. But another part of me knew that staying would mean sacrificing my dignity and self-respect. How could I look at myself in the mirror, knowing I had accepted this betrayal? I spent weeks in the cabin, hiking during the day and reflecting at night. My wife continued to reach out, insisting that we could work through this and rebuild our marriage. She even started reading books on repairing relationships after infidelity, obsessing over strategies to win me back. She sent heartfelt letters, recounting the good times in our marriage and promising to change. The solitude gave me space to think clearly. I thought about the early years of our relationship, the times we laughed until we cried, and the dreams we once shared. But I also thought about the cracks that had formed over the years, her restlessness, her need for constant validation, and my own failures to address these issues. I questioned whether those cracks could ever truly be repaired. My oldest daughter visited again, this time bringing the twins. The girls were a mix of emotions, happy to see me, but visibly weighed down by the tension at home. We spent the afternoon walking along a scenic trail, and for a moment, it felt like the old days when family outings were filled with laughter and lighthearted teasing. But the weight of reality always crept back in. The twins confided in me about their struggles at school and how they felt caught in the middle of the situation. They begged me to come home, saying they missed having a sense of normalcy. I assured them that I loved them deeply and that my decision had nothing to do with them. I explained that sometimes, even grown-ups have to make hard choices to protect their own well-being. They nodded, but I could see the tears in their eyes. It broke my heart. As the weeks went by, my wife's attempts to reach out became more desperate. She enlisted mutual friends and even her sister to plead her case. Some urged me to forgive her for the sake of the family, while others said they understood why I couldn't. I appreciated their concern, but knew this was a decision I had to make on my own. One evening, as I sat by the fireplace in the cabin, I revisited some old journals I'd kept over the years. Flipping through the pages, I was reminded of the person I used to be, a hopeful, adventurous man with big dreams for the future. Somewhere along the way, I had lost pieces of myself, sacrificing my happiness to keep the peace in my marriage. I realized that staying in this relationship would only continue that pattern. Eventually, I came to a decision. I told my wife I couldn't stay in the marriage and keep my pride. I explained that if I stayed, I'd be a broken version of myself, a man who had compromised his values to maintain an illusion of normalcy. She argued passionately, insisting that our love was worth fighting for, but I stood firm. We've agreed to divorce. It's not the outcome I ever envisioned for us, but it's the only path that allows me to move forward with integrity. My daughters are heartbroken, but they understand my decision. I've assured them that I'll always be there for them, no matter what. I've also made arrangements to move closer to where they live so I can remain an active part of their lives. The days following our decision were a whirlwind of logistics, dividing assets, meeting with lawyers, and figuring out custody arrangements for the twins. Despite the pain, my wife and I managed to keep things civil. She apologized repeatedly, expressing regret not just for the affair, but for all the ways she'd let our marriage deteriorate. I told her I forgave her, not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I needed to let go of the anger to move forward. As for the future, I'm not rushing into anything. A close friend told me I'd have no trouble finding someone new, but that's not where my head is right now. For the first time in decades, I'm focusing on myself. I want to take time to rediscover who I am outside of my roles as a husband and father. I've started picking up old hobbies again: photography, woodworking, and even writing. I've also joined a support group for men who've gone through similar experiences, and it's been surprisingly therapeutic to share my story and hear others' perspectives. These small steps have reminded me that life doesn't end after a painful chapter, it evolves. My daughters and I have grown closer through this ordeal. They've seen my vulnerability, and I've encouraged them to express their own feelings openly. We've started a new tradition of Sunday dinners, where we cook together and talk about our week. It's a small but meaningful way to rebuild our family dynamic in this new reality. As I look ahead, I'm cautiously optimistic. This chapter of my life is over, but I'm hopeful that the next one will bring healing and growth. Life has a way of surprising us, and I'm ready to face whatever comes next. Whether it's finding love again, pursuing a new career, or simply enjoying the peace of my own company, I'm determined to make the most of this second chance. One thing I know for sure is that I'll never settle for less than I deserve again. This experience has taught me the importance of self-respect and the value of surrounding myself with people who uplift and support me. It's a lesson I hope to pass on to my daughters as they navigate their own lives and relationships. In the end, while the pain of betrayal will always be a part of my story, it doesn't define me. What defines me is how I choose to move forward with strength, resilience, and an open heart. And that's exactly what I intend to do.